Okay, good evening, everyone. Let's start. Welcome to this first online research seminar at NUJC. And I'm sure that today's event is already historic. And let me explain why. We were talking to the professor yesterday, and we agreed that this coronavirus pandemic and this situation, this quarantine, definitely has some positive sides, as we reveal it later. And the example is that we've finally been able to arrange this today's seminar, as Professor Hargreaves had some time for us. Although it is early morning, they are in Ottawa. We've been able to meet with him now. And I don't think that Professor Andy Hargreaves needs a long introduction. All of you know him very well. And in this seminar, Professor, we have Nazarbayev University Graduate School of Education professors. We also have our master's students, PhD students, postdoctoral scholars, and also our alumni. And most of them graduated from our MSc in educational leadership programs, school leadership, leadership in higher education, and also some teacher practitioners and other professionals from all over Kazakhstan, who are very well familiar with all of your works, by your influential ideas in educational change and school reforms. So, dear Professor, once again, thank you so much for devoting your time, for kindly agreeing to have this meeting with us, and please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Laura. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. And could you wave if you can hear me? Excellent, excellent. That's good. This is my life now, actually. Although this is historic for you, we are in lockdown here in all of Canada. Actually, I don't know. Is that the case for you in Kazakhstan also? Yeah, yeah. So this is it's a very challenging time. All my work outside my home actually has been cancelled all the way through till until October. So my first engagement that has not been cancelled is in Kazakhstan, in Astana, in October. So I'm hoping that we'll still be able to go ahead with that. Obviously, everything's very uncertain, but I'm looking forward to meeting some of you in person, and perhaps also to be able to see some of your schools. I've read a bit about Kazakhstan from a distance. I know roughly where your PISA scores are, which are fairly typical for the kind of emerging economy that Kazakhstan is. I'm aware that principals are quite highly qualified compared to many other countries in a similar economic situation, but you're still striving hard to improve the quality and qualifications of teachers. You have a lot of diversity, but you also have some inequity, for instance, between Russian and Kazakh schools, Russian and Kazakh language children, and so that this is pretty much what I've been able to read up ahead of time, and you're a quite centralized system as well. So when we get on to talk about educational change, we'll have to bear in mind what that looks like. What I'm going to try and do today, as I share some of my slides with you, which I've prepared for this session, is to do this. So here we go. So my name is Andy Hargreaves, and I am originally from the UK. I moved to Canada in my 30s with my family to work at the University of Toronto, then moved to Boston College in the United States for 15 years and have just moved back. I've been in educational research since my mid to late 20s, and I grew up in a small community in northern England, in a working class home, working class family, and which I've just written about actually in this memoir, which is coming out on the 1st of June, Moving, a memoir of education and social mobility. It describes what it's like to grow up working class, for a period after my father died. We were on welfare for a number of years. My mother became very sick. In a sense, I started to take care of the family instead of the family taking care of me, and this was and the memoir talks about not only how that affected me and what the literature said about equity and social mobility, which is the opportunity to move in your lifetime from one position to another. But also talks about how that affects me now, basically, in terms of my culture, my background, the way I am with people, what it's like to move from a working class beginning into a middle class life. And a big part of that narrative is about my schooling and about my education. And if you read the chapters on my primary education, you'll read about a magnificent teacher called Mary Hindle, who taught me when I was 10 years old and really inspired me to want to move into teaching and then into education. She understood, if you like, the whole of me as a whole child, as she did with all her students, even way back in 1960, as it was then. And she connected the curriculum to our interests, to nature, to writing projects. And even though I was a little, as we now call it, ADHD, and sometimes bit difficult to teach because I could be very quick with some of my remarks and play practical jokes on people and so on. She let me be who I needed to be without allowing me to be too much of it. And so there was that combination of understanding the whole child and their background, but also having expectations and a framework as a school and as a society that would help you move forward. And one of the greatest pleasures and honors of my life was in 2004. I was asked to go back to my old school and to lay the foundation stone for the new building. And I said I would do this if I could do it with my best teacher, Mary Hindle, who was then about 86 years old. So she came back to the school with me. And it says this foundation stone was laid by former pupil, Professor Andy Hargreaves, and his teacher, Mary Hindle. So I grew up knowing what really good teaching looks like. That is sensitive to the background of a child, that is aware of children's unique personalities and family circumstances, and that engages the whole of the child in their learning in order to motivate them to succeed and to move forward. When I went to secondary school, I basically experienced the evil twin of this kind of teaching. I don't remember bullying amongst the students in secondary school because basically the teachers had a monopoly on the franchise. The teachers were the bullies of the students. And after my dad died when I was 12, and I had to take a lot of time off school. My mother worked 3 jobs for a while, cleaning and working in shops and looking after people's children. But with 3 boys to raise, that became too much for her. And so I started to have to take care of her, really, instead of her taking care of us. And the school really paid no attention to this, made no allowances, didn't engage with me. So for quite a while, secondary school was a struggle. And when I went to university, I decided I wanted to go into teaching and into teacher education, really to put into practice the best of what I've learned from my primary school experience, and combat and overcome through teacher education the worst of what I'd experienced in secondary schools. Because many of us go into teaching because of the teachers who taught us. Sometimes they were great teachers who inspired us. Sometimes there were teachers who did quite the opposite, and we really want to create a better kind of world. And so this is what motivated me to move into education, to become a teacher for a while, and to try and understand teachers and teaching, and to prepare better teachers. So if you want to read more about that, it goes up to the age of 22, and it's in my book, Moving, that comes out in June. What I want to do today, building on this, is really I can't draw on all of my work. There's been quite a bit of it over the last 30 to 40 years almost. But I want to really address these 5 questions today. How does change affect teachers' work? How are teachers affected by educational change? How can teachers' work become better? What can we do? What things can we affect to improve teaching? What can we do about the system? So for a whole education system, if we want better teaching and learning for all students, what kind of things do we have to think about, not just in changing a school, but in changing a whole education system? And in number 4, I'll look at some of the things I'm trying to do now in order to bring that about on a global basis. And if we have a few minutes, I'll try and address what that means for all of us in terms of leading educational change within and beyond the coronavirus pandemic. So what you'll see over the course of my own life is first of all, I'm very critical of teaching. Then I'm trying to understand teaching, to understand why teachers do what they do, what affects teaching, to try and figure out what are the conditions and the circumstances that make teaching better, to understand what it is about a society and a school system that can affect that for better or for worse, and then to talk a bit about how, as an activist and a policy advisor, I'm trying to do something about what I've learned within the world as a whole. So let's look at the first one. How does change affect teachers' work? And one of the most influential books I read when I was still in my 20s was this book by an American called Dan Lorty. Dan Lorty did a study called School Teacher. He interviewed about 100 teachers in the greater Boston area in the United States. And he was very interested in how the way people's work was organized affected how they experienced their work, what their work felt like. Before he studied teachers, he studied lawyers, for example. And when he studied lawyers, he found that lawyers who mainly work by themselves in small companies became less successful than lawyers who work with others in large organizations. And he found similar kinds of things within teaching. So he described teaching as being characterized by 3 things, which he called presentism, individualism, and conservatism. Presentism is that teaching is very busy. You're with large numbers of young people all day. They don't always do as they're told. They have very different needs. They're easily distracted. So teaching is very busy. It's very rewarding. But it's also quite overwhelming in terms of the demands that it takes on you. And teachers are on their own most of the time, he said. They're in separate classrooms, separate from each other. There's not much team teaching or collaboration with other teachers. And because you're on your own all the time in these very challenging circumstances, the result, he says, is not that most teachers become innovative, but actually they become quite conservative because they're worried about the noise levels getting up in their classroom and other teachers coming in to complain. And they don't really have time to think about the big picture or to think about the long term because they're so focused all of the time on the immediate needs of their individual students. They find teaching rewarding, but they tend to get it from heroic cases of children's lives who they've turned around rather than a more systemic view as to how the results or the learning of students overall are improving over time. And so when I moved to Canada from having worked in a number of universities in England, I became very interested in one of the questions that Lorty and people after him put, which is, so if individualism is one of the main reasons why teaching is conservative, what would happen if we could actually find some environments where teachers were more collaborative? And in particular, one of the things that researchers had said is that one of the reasons teachers don't collaborate as much as they should is simply because they don't have the time. They're with their students all day. They're exhausted at the end of the day. Even when they do collaborate, they have to do it away from their students rather than with their students. And so when I went to Canada, I arrived in the middle of a natural experiment. The Teachers Union in Ontario in Canada had bargained with the government to have elementary teachers get more preparation time away from their classes. And so here was an interesting natural experiment in a way. Teachers did now have more time, and therefore the question was, if they have more time, would they collaborate more? And so I decided to go to two school districts. One was a district that had a particular focus on collaboration, and the principals were paying a lot of attention to developing collaborative planning amongst their teachers. And the other district was an ordinary everyday district, not especially bad or good, that most people recommended when I asked for a district of that kind. And so I studied teachers' work. I interviewed teachers, watched them in both these environments. And what I found was really quite interesting. Okay, can everybody still hear me?
Yes, Andy, I'm wondering whether you will share the slides with us. The slides?
Can you see the slides?
Not yet, not yet.
You can't see. Okay. Well, thank you for asking. I thought I had. So let me try again.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see them now?
Yes.
You can see them.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, so I'm going to take you back through the slides I just showed you.
Yes.
And what I'll do is, so are you okay seeing them like this?
Yes,
Is that okay?
please, can you all mute yourselves, dear participants? Please mute yourselves.
Okay. For new. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you can.
Yes.
Yeah, so for people who've just arrived, here are the slides I went through. So this is my new book, Moving, about a working class childhood in England, and my experience of great teachers in primary school and not so great teachers in secondary school. Here are the 5 questions that I'll be addressing today in about the next 30, 40 minutes. And here's the first one that I'm looking at now, and I'm talking about Dan Lorty's book, that teachers live in a culture of presentism, individualism, and conservatism, and talking about this study I did when I arrived in Canada in the late 1980s, looking at teachers who collaborated and teachers who didn't when they'd got more time. And what I learned from this study is 2 things, really. The first is, if you just give teachers more time, it does not guarantee that they will collaborate more. because we found in the district that didn't have a focus on collaboration, the teachers just carried on working individually. They graded more papers, they phoned the parents, they put better displays up on the walls. They just did more individual work, but it wasn't quite so stressful as it used to be. The teachers, where they're in a district where the leaders helped them focus on collaboration, did collaborate more. So time itself does not guarantee that teachers will collaborate more. You need a leadership to ensure that happens, either leadership from the principal or leadership from teacher leaders within the school. The other thing we found in this study is that when teachers collaborated, they didn't always collaborate in the same way. In some schools, principals were very good about setting the terms and conditions for collaboration, but then really giving teachers lots of freedom about how they collaborated together and what the results of the collaboration would be. The principals took responsibility for the results of the collaboration and the quality, but they didn't micromanage teachers' time in how they collaborated together. In some other districts, though, in some other schools, though, within this collaborative district, the principals became over-enthusiastic, over-zealous, and they wanted to tell the teachers when to collaborate, or where to collaborate, who to collaborate with, what to collaborate about, and when the results of the collaboration should be. And we call this contrived collegiality or artificial collegiality. And when principals micromanaged the collaboration too much, the result was that actually teachers didn't like it, and so they ended up collaborating less rather than collaborating more. I think in this day and age, we see some of this phenomenon with things like data teams, for example, where if principals are just obsessed about the results and the performance and the gaps and narrowing the gaps, teachers really don't enjoy the collaborative experience. But if all kinds of data are used, including qualitative data, pictures of what it is that the children have produced and so on, then teachers are much more motivated and more engaged. So we were learning from this that the conditions we create in teaching, this is the kind of thing we now know from the OECD TALIS studies, the conditions we create in teaching of time, of leadership, and of a leadership that sets expectations for collaboration, but really respects and builds on the professionalism of teachers, can create a job that is not only more rewarding for the teachers, but the evidence pretty consistently still indicates actually produces better results and learning outcomes for the students. So this is really the first thing that I looked at. And then in 2003, I wrote this book called Teaching in the Knowledge Society, based on a study we did of 8 secondary schools and their long-term experiences of many different changes all happening to them at the same time. 5 of these schools were in Canada, 3 in New York State. We studied these schools when actually the policy environment had changed. And so in Canada, there was a conservative government. In America, there was a state government that was focusing on standards and testing. So we're now looking at what happened to teachers when the environment became more standardized. There were more high-stakes tests that in a way constrained their performance and affected their motivation. And in Canada, at least, there was an environment which politically that became very critical of teachers and started to blame teachers for alleged poor quality in teaching. And also the government took time away from teachers. So teachers now had less preparation time rather than more compared to what they used to have. So we have a different policy environment here. And what did we find? we found that teachers felt they were losing their creativity there because the environment became very standardized. They could not respond to their individual students. They couldn't respond to their indigenous culture or their second language culture. And this was very disheartening for them. So teachers began to lose motivation, began to suffer a lot of stress, ill-being. They started to feel they had to teach to the test to help their kids get through the test, but they also felt this was not particularly good teaching when they were doing this. They collaborated less rather than collaborating more. So we know that time itself doesn't increase collaboration, but if you take time away, it actually reduces collaboration. And many teachers began to want to retire early. Even quite young teachers said they would leave the profession early. So here we have two kinds of policy environments. One that encourages collaboration, and we've seen what the results of that can be in time, conditions, and leadership, all the things that the OECD TALIS studies talk about now. And we've seen the opposite of an environment that becomes very standardized, very bureaucratic, very top-down, and very disheartening and demotivating for teachers. And that has a negative effect on student learning and achievement in the mid to long term, rather than a positive one. So after this particular period, I went and did a whole range of work that was less directly connected to teaching. But a couple of years ago, I came back to the question again, which is, okay, if we're going to look at collaboration, how can we make collaboration better? And some of you may know this book that Michael Fullan and I did. There's Michael Fullan in the picture with me. Did on a thing we called professional capital. It's a new idea that we invented. I'll not tell you which one of us invented it. It doesn't matter because the idea belongs to both of us. It came from months, even years of work together. And our idea of professional capital was really in opposition to what was happening to teaching in many parts of the world. In many parts of the world, there was a movement that is in an organization called Teach for America or Teach First in England, or Teach for different societies. And the movement was to bring teachers into teaching for 2 or 3 years, not with university preparation for teaching, but with a short training program over the summer. Put them in very difficult circumstances with little support, draw on their passion and their commitment and their enthusiasm. And then those teachers would leave and they'd move into other occupations. And in time, they'd become quite influential. But of course, they had a negative rather than a positive view of public education. So they began to advocate in policy for the destruction of public education as we knew it, and its replacement with online alternatives or semi-private alternatives, competitive alternatives, and so on. And against this, Michael Fullan and I argued for an alternative that we call professional capital. And capital, the idea of capital is simply, you'll know because you're a former part of the Soviet Union, so you know all your Karl Marx and communist philosophy. The simple idea of capital is if you want a return, you have to make an investment. And of course, that's not only true economically, but it's true in other areas as well. If you want a return from people, you have to invest in people, not just financially, but inspirationally, motivationally, in terms of their conditions of work as well. And so we argued that in a good teaching, actually in professional capital looks like this, that teaching's not easy, it's hard. It's technically hard, not just emotionally hard. It requires high levels of education on long periods of training, like other professions. You never learn how to teach and then stop. It's something you're always continuously trying to improve. Again, like other professions, always learning. It involves good judgment. Some of that is based on data, but some of that is also based on experience. And the best judgment is a combination of data and experience. Teaching is something we do together when we do it well, again, like other professions, not just something we do by ourselves. And although, as we're learning in coronavirus, technology has an important place as part of teaching and learning, it doesn't, in professional capital, it doesn't replace teaching and learning, but it enhances and expands good teaching and learning. And we express this as three kinds of capital. Human capital is all about how you are as an individual, how well qualified you are, how smart you are, how dedicated you are. And that's definitely a part of what professional capital is. But the biggest part is social capital, because how we are together adds value to how we are alone. And we become better or worse as a teacher, depending on the quality of our relationships and interactions with our colleagues over time. And that's the third part, which is decision-making capital, which is about your professional judgment, improves over time if you work with other colleagues, drawing on data and drawing on experience, in order that when you're on your own, the paradox is if you collaborate with other teachers, your judgment is better when you're on your own. You still may spend most of your time on your own, but your judgment will be better when you're on your own because you collaborate effectively with other teachers. And we came back to this question, my colleague Michael O'Connor and I, just a couple of years ago, in this book we call Collaborative Professionalism. And the question we wanted to ask there, I hope I'm not going too fast, the question we wanted to ask there is so if collaboration improves the quality of teaching, what do different kinds of collaboration look like? What are the different ways to collaborate? And we were really looking at a world now where there was a lot of collaboration happening, but it took many different forms. It might take collaborative planning, or networks, or peer review, or team teaching, or lesson study, or data teams. So many ways to collaborate. And we were interested in what did these look like when they were working well, and what could we learn from that? And so we went to 5 different parts of the world to look at in Norway, in Hong Kong, in Northern Canada, in Colombia, and in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, to look at different ways of collaborating. Lesson study, professional learning communities led by teachers, curriculum planning online with teachers in isolated rural schools, cooperative learning for teachers as well as for students, and a whole network of 25,000 schools in Colombia where the teachers tutored each other in rural communities to develop peace and democracy within their schools. And what did we learn when we looked at all these examples? Well, you'll have to read the book to look at it in detail, but I'll just give you one simple finding now that's really important. 2 things really matter about effective collaboration in a school. The first is, if you like, what we call the solidity of what you do. This is what the OECD focuses on with its TALIS studies and the sense it makes of them. And the solidity is about the quality of what you do, whether you provide feedback to your teachers, whether your teachers provide feedback to each other, whether you use data to inform your instruction and your planning. So the solidity is all about the technical side of collaboration, the way you structure the interactions, the things that you look at together. The equally important side, though, is the solidarity side. And the solidarity side is really about the quality of relationships, the level of trust, the degree of mutual support that teachers have for each other, especially in difficult circumstances. It's easier to have policies on the second aspect, the solidity. But if you have that without any solidarity, what you will find is the quality of the interaction is very poor. Try, for example, getting feedback from somebody you don't know. Even worse, from a principal you don't trust or don't even like. So to do the procedures well, the quality of the relationships also have to be strong. But most policies tend to focus only on the procedures. The solidarity side is really about building the leadership that can inspire and bring together a community of high expectation and high trust and high support and high confidence in the teachers as professionals to collaborate effectively together. But if you have only solidarity, but don't have specific things for teachers to do or protocols to help them interact in a rigorous way, teachers will tend to avoid difficult conversations because they're afraid of insulting each other or giving each other critical feedback on their practice. So solidarity without solidity can be vague. Solidity without solidarity can be contrived and forced and artificial. And the power of effective collaboration is to bring these two things together. This is what we've found from our most recent work on conditions of teaching. And you can read about that in a journal which is open access, free online, called Phi Delta Kappa. You can get it off my website as well, worldwideWeb.andyhargreaves.com, on solidarity and solidity. That's if you don't want to read the book. And if you have no time for the book, you'll also find some 2 to 4 minute videos on my website that explain this idea very simply to people. The last thing we've done, which is very recent, is looking at teacher well-being and what it is that creates teacher well-being, because if you want student well-being, you have to have teacher well-being. If you're a mess as an educator, you're not going to be able to help your kids pull it together and hold it together. So it's really important, if we're going to take care of students' well-being, that we have to take care of teachers' well-being. What a lot of the literature will tell you is to improve teachers' well-being. There's many initiatives on things like developing mindfulness and ability to relax, and all these things are important. But what we found in our recent work in Ontario in Canada, that's in this report, which is also available on my, you can download it from the website, is that the greatest threats to teacher well-being are from two areas. One is from being overloaded, from having too many top-down changes, too many things coming at you at the same time that you cannot manage or handle. So we found in one district, for example, hundreds of teachers were doing courses on mindfulness, online courses on mindfulness. Now, if a few teachers are doing online courses in mindfulness, great for those teachers. If almost all your teachers are doing online courses in mindfulness, there's probably something wrong with your system. And in fact, when we had systems draw what they were dealing with in terms of reform and change, this system was the wildest chart. It was like an ADHD chart with millions of innovations, all of which they're trying to develop to help poor children. But the poor teachers somehow had to integrate all these innovations themselves. And it was just, and they were very dedicated. They wanted to make a difference, but they were also overwhelmed. So if we want to pay attention to teacher well-being, we have to think about what kind of system we want that supports teachers' well-being and doesn't overload it. The other thing we found is is that in Ontario, there has been a standardized testing system, fairly high stakes, in grades 3, 6, and 9. And teachers are very opposed to this. They felt that in preparing children for these tests, it stressed the kids out. It was culturally biased against second language children. It discriminated against new Canadians who'd just arrived. And because it created anxiety amongst their children, it created anxiety amongst teachers. So a second thing about teacher well-being is you get ill-being if teachers have to teach things they do not believe in, that they believe are bad for their children rather than good for their children. So you need a system. It can be centralized, it can be less centralized, but it has to be a system that teachers truly believe in, that they feel is good for their children and not harmful for their children. So I've talked in all this first part, which is the biggest part, about teachers, about the conditions of teaching, about how bad and good conditions affect the quality of teaching and teachers' relationships with each other, and about what we can do to change those conditions over time. So in the second part, I'll just spend a brief period here. I'm going to talk a bit about what we can do to change those conditions for those of you who are in policy or on a system basis. So Laura, stay with me. I'm going to be about another 10 minutes, okay? Is everybody all right? Would you wave if you're all right so far? I've been going quite fast. You're okay so far? Okay, good, good. So, what should we do about changing the system? Well, in 2009 and 2012, my colleagues, Dennis Shirley and I, wrote a book called, two books about a thing we call the fourth way. What is the fourth way? Well, we were responding to a world which had had three ways, at least in the West, until that point. The first was really, we believe in teachers, we'll leave them alone, they're professionals, they'll get on with the job. And the evidence was in some places they did, and in some places they didn't. So there was innovation, but no coherence or consistency. And so then along came the second way in many countries. Margaret Thatcher in England, Ronald Reagan, then the Bushes in the United States. The World Bank, actually, pretty much with its policies, and that was, so if we can't trust teachers, then we'll tell them what to do. We'll set their goals, we'll set them performance targets, we'll standardize things, we'll have more testing, we'll have more market competition, and we won't even give them much support to do this. We'll just have a lot of accountability. And the evidence of that is it got some short-term improvements, but it created massive disillusionment in the profession and made it very hard to recruit high-quality teachers into teaching. So then along came a third way. And in the third way, which was Bill Clinton in America, or Tony Blair in England, for example, Gerhard Schroeder in Germany, and I think we have a lot of this now with the OECD, we'll still have the goals, tests, performance targets, like PISA, for example, but now we'll provide teachers with lots more support, training, materials, books, curriculum, time, resources, and we'll create more interaction amongst teachers. So we'll have data teams, feedback, a lesson study, so teachers can study what they're doing together. And this was definitely good progress from the second way, but we found again that people tended to become obsessed with the data rather than with teachers' experience and judgment. And they also became still obsessed with the targets and with teaching to the test in order to meet the targets. So a lot of the third way actually ended up ultimately really regressing to the second way. So on the basis of a series of studies, that Dennis Shirley and I had done in Canada, in England, in the United States. We advocated what we called a fourth way. And in the fourth way, we argued the task of central government is not to micromanage. We know you're quite centralized, but not to micromanage. You're not the only centralized system, though. Singapore is very centralized, but it's also very inspiring at the same time. And it's not as big as you. You can, you get in a car in Singapore and go in any direction, and within 30 minutes, you're out of the country. So it's centralized, but it's very manageable. You're a much bigger country, some large centers of population, some smaller. So a centralized system is more difficult to do in that kind of setting. In the fourth way, the job of central government is to set a vision and to say mainly, we're going this way, we're not going this way. There's no argument about that. This is the way we're going. And we're going to try and inspire you as professionals to move in this direction and to have the capability to meet what we believe is important for our society at the moment. And the job of the public is not just to choose between market alternatives of school, this school for my child rather than this school for my child, but the job of the public is to be publicly engaged with their school, with their community, and with their society. And instead of change being bureaucratically driven, the point is for professionals in schools themselves to have much more responsibility, not individual autonomy, but collective responsibility. So the second way, if you like, was very bureaucratic top-down. It was driven by bureaucracy or very market-driven and competitive. But the third way is more democratic. It's about engaging the public. It's more professional in terms of engaging the professional. And it's not about bureaucratic accountability. It's about collective responsibility. So most of what you achieve is by getting people to feel truly responsible together for doing a good job. And you have a little bit of accountability left over for those moments when there's corruption or mismanagement and things fail. Responsibility becomes your driver rather than accountability becoming your driver. So this was the fourth way. And so learning all this, everything I'd learned about teachers and teaching, the conditions of teaching, worse and better collaboration, and then studying systems, high-performing systems that were working well and exemplified this thing we came to call the fourth way. And the last years, my challenge has been, so how can we bring a fourth way about in the world, actually? Not just in this school or that school, but in the world. And so I've created with 8 countries a thing called the ARC Education Project. This is worldwideweb.atrico, ATRICO.org, worldwideweb.atrico.org. Each of these countries pays $30,000 so that we have a secretariat at the University of Ottawa. And we are united by 3 things. First is we have an annual summit in a different country where systems ministers, deputy ministers, and the heads of teacher unions engage in peer learning together that we facilitate in an environment of high trust, complete openness, and total confidentiality. And so they coach each other on problems of practice. This is collective responsibility among countries. How can they do this? Because they are united by common values. And those common values, which are a condition of anybody joining, that they already have or that they want, are broad excellence, not just science and maths and literacy, equity, inclusion, inclusion of special needs, but also different languages, different ethnicities, of all kinds of students who are marginalized, democracy, and human rights in systems that are professionally run, not assuming you're going to run it with low quality teachers who you micromanage from the top. So they're united by these summits, they're united by common values, and we have world-class thought leaders who give their time for free to work with these systems. People like Sir Ken Robinson, for example, gives his time for free. Pasi Sahlberg from Finland, now in Australia. And now we're beginning to build things with this group between the summits as well as within them. And one of the things we've done to help them and support them is these are the values. And you'll get all these PowerPoints later on, by the way. I'll send them to Laura. She can share them with you. One of the things we're doing is now helping these systems within the pandemic. So later today, I have a phone call at their request from the Education Minister of Scotland, who has some problems he wants to discuss with me about how to move his system forward, how to cope within the COVID pandemic. We did, within the first week of many schools closing, we did a quick survey of all our systems, and which we called a rapid response, to find out what they were doing about online learning, what they were doing about safety of vulnerable children, what they're doing to support their teachers, whether the schools were still open or closed, and so on. And then we began to write some op-eds, again, drawing on their knowledge and experience. So I have pieces in the last 2 weeks in the Washington Post, the London Times Educational Supplement, and a Canadian magazine called The Conversation. And what this has led us to think about in helping these systems in the pandemic now is, I'm thinking about when schools go back. I'll not go into detail. In fact, I'll not even show you this, because we need to start to get into some discussion, I think, is that when schools go back, I think there's 3 big things we'll see. One is anybody who thought schools were a bad idea, they're going to change their mind. Because certainly in Canada, we've got parents at home with their children who just don't know what to do. We've got parents who still have their jobs to do, but they're doing them from home, and they've got children running around the house. They've got children who can't concentrate, children who are ADHD. And anybody who thought online learning was an alternative to teaching is going to have a very serious rethink, because schools are places for children to go while their parents go to work. It's very simple. That's the first thing. The second thing is schools are places where you get care and community. You get care from your teachers as well as your parents, sometimes from your teachers instead of your parents, if your parents are on drugs or in prison or involved in domestic violence, for instance. And the places where you get care from your friends, where you build community with your friends. You learn to take your turn, sit in a circle, listen to others, value their opinions. And then there are also places you can learn. And I think what we're learning from the COVID crisis is if your kids are going to learn, it's really hard if they don't have a qualified teacher to help them and to know how to structure their learning and support children and vary their teaching according to all the differences that the children have. But I think what we're also learning, paradoxically, is that technology is and can be a part of learning now, especially in isolated rural communities, where it can give you access to curriculum you don't have the capacity to provide there. And technology can connect teachers across rural communities. But even in Canada, more than 30% of children do not have access to technology or to devices. So right now there's huge inequity in access to learning resources. And so I think when we come out of this, the paradox is on the one hand, we'll say, yes, we really need schools and teachers. And on the other hand, we'll also say, every child needs to have universal access as a human right to technology to enhance their learning, just as a human right that is like food or electricity or transportation, provided not by the market, but provided at public cost for public good. So what I've tried to say in this hour that we've had together is that I grew up experiencing teaching at its best and teaching at its worst. Education, because I wanted to be a good teacher, not a bad teacher, and then I wanted to help train and develop and support teachers to become the best that they could be. And I learned that this is not just a matter of individual will, but it's really a question of what the culture and the leadership looks like in the school to create a positive environment that has both solidarity of relationships and solidity and precision about what it is that teachers do together so that they can have challenging conversations and improve their practice. And if we want all that in a few schools, not in a lot of schools, we have to think about how we change the system for the better. And that's about values, it's about public engagement, and it's about collective professional responsibility. And in these few years now, in the twilight of my career, probably, I've really been spending my time not just talking about that, but working with ministers in different countries, really to try and start to build a global movement for better teaching and learning, for a stronger profession, for inspiring leadership, for trust in our teachers, for greater equity, for more inclusion, and for a better world. Thank you for listening to this part of the presentation, and I'll be very interested to hear what questions you have next. And perhaps, Laura, what you could do is, because I've given people a lot, is for 3 or 4 minutes, give people a bit of time to kind of write down and think about what their questions might be. And even if they can or want to interact with each other, I'll take a break for 5 minutes, have a little drink, and then we'll come back into discussion for the last half hour.
Yeah, meanwhile, dear Andy, on behalf of the educational community here in Kazakhstan, let me thank you, not only for this seminar, but also for your inspiring ideas, for leading, for being the leading author in this field, and for taking this time. I know that you are always busy, but taking this time to talk to us. And now I understand the feelings and the emotions of other scholars, other colleagues who've been previously reading you a lot, who know you, but today's meeting is different. It is a lively meeting and it's personal experience. Thank you for sharing your autobiographical segment too. And now, yes, let's give some time to our colleagues before they can pose their questions here.
And I'll be reading your chats. I'll be reading what you've put in chat.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll mute myself now. I'll be reading chats, and then we'll come back together in about 5 minutes.
And let me also thank dear Dushon for connecting me, for introducing us to each other, and also facilitating this research seminar. Dushon, thank you so much.
No problem, Andy. It's wonderful to see you, Andy.
And also, I've noticed Professor Jane Knight.
Yeah, Dushon, wonderful to see you also. Fantastic. Thank you.
And this is the largest research seminar we've had. So today's seminar has been attended by almost 70 people. Yeah. We don't hear you. Mhm.
Okay, so thank you for your question. So perhaps I could start with the ones that are in the chat function, and I'll go sort of in reverse order if that is okay with everybody. Um, these are, and I hope you can see me now. Somebody was saying that the light was, we have a window above here, and at a certain time in the day, the sun comes through. It's only for about half an hour, so can you all see me clearly now?
Very well.
I apologize for that. The last question is really important, which is about culture and collaboration. And one of the reasons in our recent book on collaborative professionalism, that we studied examples in different parts of the world is we wanted to understand how culture affects collaboration, and that people do collaborate differently in different cultures. And that is absolute, not only is it fine, but it's also a joyous thing that people interact differently in different parts of the world. So for example, in Hong Kong, collaboration is very structured. It's very formal. It's very East Asian. It's very precise. It's like the culture of Confucius. There's a lot of respect for hierarchy, for formality, for the principal is definitely in charge, and the principal decides when other people are going to participate. But she and they are also very inspiring. They work really really well together. Um, and if you go to Latin America, to Colombia, then when people collaborate there, they're kind of wild and crazy, and they'll talk about politics and about food and about family, and they'll interrupt each other, and so these two are like different planets when you watch how they collaborate. And I think what we learn from this is that the way you collaborate must be sensitive to your culture. All cultures can change, of course, and that is important to understand too. So, so that's the first thing. And secondly, you cannot take exactly the way some people collaborate in one culture and transplant it to another culture. This is why we've got to be very wary of global organizations who think there's one way to do this and want all cultures to conform to the same PowerPoint slide. I think we've seen those problems in the past with the World Bank and with McKinsey and with other organizations as well. So that was a great question. A second question is, there were two of them, is what do you do with governments who insist on being standardized? When the profession knows that this really doesn't work well, and the simple answer to that is it's not easy. But two things can bring about a change. One is a lot of small changes that provide evidence in one school here or a small network of schools somewhere else, that when there is inspiring leadership, engaging learning, projects that students find are really inspiring for them and relevant to their culture, teachers who collaborate effectively together. If you begin to build some small examples in your school or in clusters of schools, and then begin to bring them to public notice, there is then an example of other ways of getting high quality. And sometimes governments want accountability for different reasons. One is sometimes they don't know what the alternative is, or they're complying too much with the World Bank or whoever provides the funding. So one thing is just to create alternatives that show you can actually achieve the results, but by better means than the government is trying to get you to achieve them at the moment. The other is the public. Governments change their mind not usually because of the profession, but they change their minds because of the public. So the more the public is engaged in your school, engage with your teachers, engage with your students, the more the public will become your advocates. And the public will change the government's mind, not the profession. This means paradoxically for teachers that professionalism now means the aspiration is to have more autonomy from government, but less autonomy from parents and your community. So teachers, if they want more autonomy from government, they have to be more open, inclusive, and collaborative with parents and their communities, not to say, I'm the expert, I know what to do, you comply with me. So I think it's not a complete answer, but it's the beginning of an answer as to how we start to think about this. Somebody asked, these are related, what's the fifth way? And I was asked yesterday, I'm doing quite a few media interviews. Somebody said, will there be a transformation after coronavirus? Will we rethink schools completely differently? And I thought about that quite hard. And I said, I didn't think so. But I thought there would be an accelerated evolution. And an accelerated evolution means schools will still be very important. They'll still really matter. We'll want places for kids to go, places for kids to be cared for, places to meet your friends. But at home, parents will be getting examples of what their children are doing at school. Are they getting interesting projects? Are they getting experiments that children can do in the garden or outside, or even studying the properties of an egg, which is what my grandchildren have been doing, for example? Or will they just be getting worksheets of mathematical problems and the parents can then see how bored they are, how uninterested they are? So I think there'll be a movement for more engaging learning. And as I explained, I think definitely there'll be a movement for technology not to replace teachers, but for technology to support teachers. And after, certainly in this country, after the coronavirus crisis, every teacher is going to have some basic knowledge of how to work with technology. And you could not say that 1 year ago. And I think the same is true in higher education. Every lecturer and professor in higher education now knows how to teach online to some degree. So before, we used to have people who taught online versus people who didn't teach online. Now we're going to have everybody online, and people may have different views about when it's good or when it's not good, but at least everybody's going to have the capacity. So I think there will be a movement for universal access, and to think about how you blend that use of technology with the highly effective personal, emotional, caring interactions of the teacher. So not a revolution in the fifth way, but perhaps an accelerated evolution. And perhaps that's a book I should write next. But I have a few books before that. And in higher education, I think that applies there as well. Higher education is under pressure in many countries now. So more instruction like this is going online. But to be honest, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing this all the time. Like, I actually like to meet real people. I like to see the whites, their eyeballs. I like to feel them emotionally as well as engage with them intellectually. That's harder to do online. So there's a cost factor which will push universities to do more of this. And I think we need to push back and say we can and should do some of this for access for people in remote places. But but not lose that real quality of what great professors can do with students they know well. Okay, so go ahead, Laura. So I'd like to hear some questions now. Can't hear you.
Thank you so much. I was thinking about giving some opportunity to our colleagues maybe to speak. You can actually unmute yourselves at any time you want. Darhan, right?
Hello everybody. Dr. Hargreaves, thank you very much for this excellent and very, very engaging presentation. And not presentation, actually. Just hearing you speak, I didn't really have to look at any slides. So my question is, you know, I keep wondering, people like you who know a lot about education reform, how it happens. What do you think about excellence initiatives? So when government creates, for example, a network of schools that accept only the best students, that are funded very very differently than the rest of the education system, and you were talking about those little success stories that, you know, in this school something worked and in other schools something worked. What do you think about those government initiatives that invest heavily in the network of schools to kind of try to change the education system in the country?
Okay, so I think this is a trick question.
It's the one on my mind. I'm sorry. That's, you know, I keep thinking about it.
So if I can just check, in Kazakhstan, is there a policy initiative to support innovation in networks of more elite schools? Is that correct?
There is, absolutely, and that's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me first of all give you an alternative to that, and then come back to the situation that you describe. The alternative, again, if you go to my website, there's an article I just published this week in a magazine that talks about Uruguay. Uruguay is one of the countries in our network. Uruguay is an emerging economy in Latin America. It's still not a full developed economy. But in 2007, it decided to give every child a laptop and internet connection, everyone in the country. So everybody has an internet connection in the country now, no matter where they are in Uruguay. And it also created a center, a government center for innovation. And so now a third of the schools in Uruguay are involved in innovative projects. And those are not just the elite schools, those are all schools. And so the center is not just a center for technology, but it's a pedagogical center to support innovation in all the schools. And I went to see some of the poorest schools in the country doing innovative projects, for instance, on public transportation in their community. And then they brought in the mayor of Montevideo to hear their presentation and respond to their suggestions for change and improvement in their community. So if you want to look at a radical alternative, I'd say you have a national network of innovation. You involve lots of schools, not just a few. You have people with pedagogical knowledge and experience who can go out and train, develop, support those schools, build their teachers' capacity around work that's very engaging for those students. And the question is how do you get there? Now when even in the West, when most people build a network, they start with elite schools, and but elite schools in a different way. By elite, it's not necessarily the smartest students or the private schools. They're elite in the sense that they're usually schools that are already a bit innovative. They're schools that are already motivated to want to do this. They're schools with very inspiring leaders. They're schools that look like if you invest in them, you'll have some success. So what governments want is to invest in something and show some success. And they're afraid if they invest in the poorest schools, they won't get much success. And politically, that's bad news, basically. So Uruguay is what it should look like. Networks, most people usually start with a first wave, and then they move into a second wave or a third wave after that. So if you were working with government, I'd say, okay, you started here. Let's see what you've learned from here. Now let's think about what that would look in a poor setting, in places where it's harder to recruit teachers. The quality may not be quite so good. What extra supports do you need in that setting? Let's try and find some schools in that kind of setting where you can not exactly replicate this, but begin to adapt and adjust it over time.
Thank you very much for this response there. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, no, I understand the problem though. Yeah.
And we have an interesting question in this chat. If you have a look here, by Miramgul Mashtakova, we have a question.
Okay, I can see that. The answer is no. The answer is not yet. Have I seen a systematic approach to teacher well-being? And I think part of that is well-being is related to other aspects of what it feels like to be a teacher. And I think we've only just started calling it teacher well-being. First of all, we thought about the students. We thought about their mental health. So with coronavirus, we're also thinking about their physical health, their emotional health, sometimes their spiritual health too. And then some people started to think, hey, what about the teacher's well-being as well as the students' well-being? So well-being overlaps with things like teacher motivation, teacher engagement, teacher satisfaction. So are there countries which have paid attention to the quality of work life for their teachers systematically? And I'd say yes, there are. And some of the highest performing countries are good examples of this. I'll pick two, particularly Finland and Singapore. They go about it in quite different ways, but Singapore really supports the quality of its teachers. It selects very qualified teachers. It gives them constant career guidance. So there's always somebody, every year you'll meet with somebody who's thinking about you, your career, which path you want to take, which path you want to follow. Teachers from, when I was at Boston College, we'd get teachers, principals from Singapore come and do a PhD, a master's with us, their countries. Singapore would send some of their teachers and principals when the time was ready to selected universities that they trusted overseas for them to develop their skills. And everything is paid for. You don't have to pay for yourself. So there's real investment in professional development and learning. And I think Finland does that in a different kind of way. More of that is within the school. Schools are very collaborative. There's lots of time away from your class to collaborate with other teachers, more than any other system in the world. So there's a lot of thinking that what does the work environment need to be like for teachers so that teachers can be at their best for their students. I think we've only just started to reinterpret this as a question of teacher well-being. But if you're Maramgol Mashtakova, if I've said that correctly, if you go to a journal called Teaching and Teacher Education, my colleague Dennis Shirley and I have this month published our results on teacher well-being and teacher ill-being in Canada, so you'll be able to follow up some of the questions and arguments. I think that will come. I think we will have systems that deliberately, as a whole, pay attention to teacher well-being. But in a way, we've been thinking about this for some time, using different vocabulary.
Hello, Professor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much for your lecture. It was very, very fascinating to see you just like this and listen to your wonderful presentation. My name is Gulmira, and I just wanted to ask about, and you probably covered this question already, but I still want to ask it again. Let's imagine teachers who've been working in the culture of performativity / conformativist culture. What do we need to do to reorient those teachers back to learning, back to agency, back to change? Where do we start? That's my question. Thank you.
Oh, that's an absolutely fantastic question, and I think it addresses two things. One is the kind of systems that people have been working in, and certainly in the West, it's also a generational question. So different generations of teachers approach their teaching differently, and there's a great book on this second issue by a former doctoral student of mine. She's now a professor in New York University in Buffalo. Her name is Corrie Stone Johnson, and I forget the title of the book, but it's about her dissertation. And she looked at what in the West we call Generation X. So in the West, I'm a baby boom generation. I grew up in the 1960s. We were flower children, rock and roll. We wanted to change the world. We wanted total autonomy and freedom. And Generation X came behind us, and there weren't as many jobs available, and the climate changed, so there wasn't as much funding for public education. That's when standards, targets, performativity came in during the Thatcher years in England and the Reagan years in America. And so they learned to teach in an environment that was more standardized, that was more tested. But they'd also grown up to be a bit more calculative about their own energy, their own time, and their own work. So Generation X, if you ask them to do something, they'll say, well, what's in that for me? Right? What support will you give me, as well as what will I do for this? How will I balance that with my life? I'm going to spend so much time on this, but I need to think about. So Generation X is much more calculative, and in the West, we've kind of had a negative view of Generation X because they weren't as idealistic as people like me. And what Corrie Johnson did in a great dissertation where she argued with me all the time, it was fantastic, that she really tried to understand Generation X rather than to criticize them. They were okay with some of the testing. They didn't love it, but they accepted it, and they could work with it. So we have to understand it is a different generation. I think one thing that generation has given us, which is very important, is well-being, is the importance of having a balanced life. I grew up and my wife also, in teaching, and all our generation, we'd work till very late at night. We'd work most of the weekends. We'd become exhausted sometimes. We wouldn't have other kinds of life because we wanted to change everything and give everything in order to do that. And sometimes other things, health, family, and so on, became sacrificed a bit because of that. So Generation X is not all bad. And when we look at how they respond to their work environment, first we have to understand it before we judge it. Once we've understood it, then probably it affects how they collaborate. And so Generation X is more likely to be happy in a data team that gets a result than they are in an open discussion about performativity, for example, which you and I might like, but they will be, so they'll say, okay, we'll collaborate, that's okay, but is it worthwhile? Will there be a practical result? After 2 meetings, will I be able to see the impact of what it is I'm doing? Where's the evidence that this will make a difference with the children? So I think your question's really important, which is instead of saying they're bad people and everything you've been doing has been wrong, actually understand them from the inside and try to really mobilize what it is they know and can do to a different way of collaborating than might be applicable for other people. Does that help?
Thank you so much. Thank you, absolutely.
We have a couple of more questions, Andy. If you have a look at the chat by Bahut and Alton.
So this is Alton, okay? Just give me a minute to read it. Preschool teacher, early years, control problem. Oh, wonderful question. Alton, can I see who you are?
Alton, please show up.
Alton, where are you?
I think Alton is a PhD student here at UGC. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, wherever you are, Alton, if you come on eventually, thanks for the question. There are huge issues around preschool and early years. So the good news about preschool and early years is that many countries are now starting to realize that if you want more equity, one of the absolutely most evidence-driven policies that you can have confidence in is to provide universal support for early years education. So if you invest in that, it has one of the biggest payoffs, and governments across the world are really doing that in a big way as one of their major policy priorities. So we're thinking a lot about preschool and early years, and that's a really good thing. This is a time when children develop their vocabulary, develop their language, develop their early capacities to self-regulate emotionally, for example. So this is hugely helpful to do that. The question is then, what do children do in the early years? And there are really 2 movements. One is to try and download us from higher up the system into preschool. So preschool becomes a kind of mini version of structured learning in elementary and in high school, to want to have more literacy, to want to have a list of words that you practice and so on. And the other movement is more towards free play, for example. We know that play is very important. Pasi Selberg has just written a very good book on this in Australia. And I work with the Prime Minister of Scotland. Remember, I have to call them later on, to call the Education Minister. And one of the things I've been advising them is that actually, instead of taking practice from the university and then making high schools a bit like university, and elementary schools a bit like high schools, and preschools a bit like elementary schools, actually to build it the other way and build a really good preschool environment, collaboratively amongst your educators, and take many of the best things from preschool and actually build your elementary system on that, and then take many of the best things from elementary schools and build your high school system on that, and then take many of the best things from there and build your university on that. So in practice actually recommending starting at the bottom rather than at the we should take the best of what we know about preschool and early childhood and build that up the other way.
Thank you so much. These are fantastic, fantastic suggestions. Thank you so much, Professor.
You're very welcome. Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
One more question, the last question in the chat by Bahat Jumatai. And did you see the question?
Okay, all right. No, I'm reading it. You're okay.
Yeah.
First of all, I had to find it. Yeah, so the last question, I'm asked this a lot. I'm asked this a lot. Very, very, very occasionally, there's a brilliant teacher, a Robin Williams kind of teacher, who is fantastic with their kids, but has no idea how to collaborate with other teachers. And we should not only tolerate those teachers, but we should try and value them. And find any way we can to integrate them into the rest of the community, but not have very high expectations of what that will look like. If you have quite a number of teachers like that, it's a problem. It's a problem for the school, and it's a problem for the community. So the main expectation should be in teaching is collaborative. It is in medicine, it is in social work, it is in any other profession. If you can't collaborate, don't come into this profession, because you're going to be working with other adults, and we'll show you how to do that. And you're going to be working with other, and you're going to be working together for your children, not just the time. You will still be on your own. Teaching is still, well, we're not saying you're not going to teach on your own and in the way that you know best for your students. But working with other teachers is to help you be better when you're on your own, and for you to help them to be better when they're on their own as well. So I think we need to be very clear communicating that collaboration doesn't mean that you have no individual judgment anymore. I think we need to reassure teachers about that, but also to say that collaboration with other adults, teachers and parents, is actually part of what it means to be a professional now. And if you can't do this, then probably you need to think about doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mm-hmm. I see that one seminar is not enough for us to cover all these issues and to ask all these questions to you. And definitely in the future, I think we'll be thinking about another meeting, initiating another meeting with you.
Sure.
Okay, so we don't have.
Sorry, Laura. Before we let Professor Andy go, I have a very important question. I mean, at least for myself, it's important. I mean, Professor Andy's this presentation is very enthusiastic, very promising, right? And based on Professor Andy's experience, I can see that he did his studies in well-developed countries: Singapore, Finland, Hong Kong, Canada, United States. My question would be...
Sorry, the major exception is Colombia.
Yeah, Colombia. Yes, but my question would be, I mean, before collaborating, before making the teachers to sit down and collaborate for the good purpose, I think the teachers need motivation. And very often the motivation in post-Soviet countries, like Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, they are linked to the financial needs. I mean, if a teacher is getting like a $400 or $500 per month, and if you are requiring from them to sit down and collaborate for the good purpose, I don't think it's going to be very effective. Yeah. The exceptions would be, I mean, of course, in those countries we have these international schools, right, who are doing like international baccalaureate program or something like that. Of course, this is a requirement for them, and they will sit down and they will do it as a routine. But I can't say that it's going to be uniformed for the whole countries. So what's your suggestion for those countries with the, I don't want to say it's a poor countries or something like that, but everyone knows the fact that teachers are underpaid in those countries.
Yep.
And we cannot expect from them. What's your suggestion to, first of all, give them a good motivation? And another thing I'm worried is we need to teach the teachers.
I have to hold you now because I have another meeting to go to after this, and we're already 11 minutes over time. So it's a great question, and I'd like to thank you for your question. And I'll give two responses. First of all, just to honor the point that's behind your question, something that Michael Fullen and I say in Professional Capital, we're very clear about this, is you have to pay your teachers enough. And we know that in developing countries, the World Bank will promote any policy other than increasing teachers' pay. Indeed, it's often a condition of receiving World Bank funding that you do not increase teachers' pay, which is an appalling policy. It's an absolute disgrace for the World Bank to believe that you can get high quality learning and equity and development on the cheap. And that instead, kids can just learn off their iPhones, or you can have teachers who will come in for 2 or 3 years and then leave, or that teachers can have 3 jobs just to make a living, 3 teaching jobs, or maybe a job working in a local store or on the farm, or and of course it's extraordinarily difficult to collaborate if you're just working all the time just to try and put food on the table. So I just absolutely want to honor what's behind your question and urge the emerging economies and the developing countries of the world to unite against the World Bank and to say this policy is a disgrace of global privilege and donation, and that high quality teaching everywhere should be an absolute priority. At the same time, I would say, so we have to work with what we have, and that there are very good examples from the Escuela Nueva network in Colombia that also exists in Vietnam and in other countries of teachers who are not especially well paid, often working in isolated rural communities, most of them women, to be honest, who will, the theory of change there. So the theory of change for the World Bank or McKinsey is in countries with low capacity in teaching, the teachers aren't very good, so we'll give them a very prescribed and standardized curriculum that almost line by line tells them what to teach. In Colombia and in a similar project with thousands of schools in Mexico, there's a different theory of change. On this, so I asked you to read a book by Santiago Rincon Gallardo, who is Mexican American, called Liberating Learning, where he talks about this. And there the theory of change is, amongst all the teachers you have, even where there's low capacity, if you need to teach something, there's already somebody who knows how to do that. And so what you need to do is somehow circulate that idea through having local teaching centers, demonstration lessons, not experts teaching teachers, but teachers teaching teachers, and moving the ideas around that already exist. And even in very poor environments, that exists, and that has some success. And as we get more technology available, even teachers in very isolated locations will be able to connect with other teachers to do that. So first, absolutely increase teachers' pay. It's a disgrace that the World Bank won't support that. And in the meantime, do what you can to be able to move, not to send people to workshops with experts, but to facilitate moving simple, good ideas around that will improve the quality of people's work.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you so much. And have a very good day. So our
Thank you, Andy.
seminar is over now.
Yeah.
We'll
Stay
be...
well, stay safe, stay well, stay safe, stay home.
Thank
Okay?
you. Let's
All
yeah, thank you.
Hopefully I'll see you in October.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Let's hope. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks for the
Bye.
opportunity.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.